He did not shiver in 40 below. He just sat there whispering numbers, staring through us with cloudy, dead eyes. Mark gripped the oversized steering wheel of his Kenworth T800, his knuckles white against the black leather, fighting the urge to vomit. The visceral reaction was not from the smell. There was no scent coming from the passenger seat, not even the expected metallic tang of frozen blood or the sour reek of unwashed skin. It was the absence of everything that made Mark's stomach churn. The cab of the truck, usually a sanctuary of diesel heat and classic rock, felt suddenly like a vacuum. 10 minutes ago, the Dalton Highway had been a lonely, violent ribbon of ice cutting through the Alaskan dark. It was late February, the kind of season where the sun was a rumor and the wind was a physical assault. Mark had been hauling a double load of timber southbound from Deadhorse, grinding gears through a whiteout that reduced the world to the 30 feet of swirling chaotic snow illuminated by his high beams. He was a veteran of the haul road. He knew the rules. Keep moving, respect the ice, and never stop for shadows. But the figure had not been a shadow. It had stood in the center of the lane, barely visible, a pale obstruction in a world of gray. Mark had slammed the air brakes, the trailer jackknifing slightly, the massive tires screaming as they fought for purchase on the black ice. The truck had come to a shuddering halt just inches from the man's knees. And that was the first thing that was wrong. The man was naked from the waist up. In the Arctic, exposure kills in minutes. At 40 below zero, exposed skin freezes instantly. But this man had stood there, barefoot in the snow, wearing only tattered, frost-stiffened suit trousers. His chest was pale, hairless, and devoid of goosebumps. He did not hug himself. He did not stumble. He just stood, his arms hanging limp, staring at the grill of the truck with an expression of absolute vacancy. Mark's lizard brain, the part inherited from ancestors who ran from saber-toothed cats, screamed at him to put the truck in gear and drive around, to crush the figure if he had to. That's not right. That's not human. But Mark was a father. He had a 20-year-old son back in Fairbanks. The moral imperative overrode the survival instinct. Cursing vividly, Mark had popped the air brake release, grabbed his heavy parka, and thrown open the driver's side door. The wind hit him like a solid wall, stealing the breath from his lungs, instantly freezing the moisture in his nose. "Hey, get in. You gonna die out there." Mark had screamed over the roar of the gale. The figure had not moved. Mark had to scramble down from the cab, his boots crunching on the packed ice, and physically drag the man toward the truck. Touching him was the second mistake. The skin was not just cold. It was hard, like touching a side of beef hanging in a freezer locker. There was no give, no warmth, no shivering reflex. Now they were inside. Mark had cranked the heater to the maximum setting, the vents blasting hot air directly at the passenger. The cab should have been a sauna, but the air around the passenger seat shimmered, not with heat, but with a strange, stagnant clarity. Mark shifted gears, trying to get the heavy rig back up to speed, glancing nervously at the mirror, then back at the passenger. "Look, buddy," Mark said, his voice trembling despite his best effort to sound authoritative. "I'm radioing the troopers at Coldfoot. We'll get you help. What's your name? How long were you out there?" The man did not blink. His eyes were the color of dirty dishwater, filmed over with cataracts or frost. He stared straight ahead at the dashboard, his jaw slack. Then the whispering started again. It was a dry, rasping sound, like sandpaper on stone. 37.0. Mark frowned. "What? Is that a coordinate? A mile marker?" The passenger did not acknowledge him. The lips barely moved. 36.9. The rhythm was mechanical. Mark reached for the CB radio handset, needing to hear another human voice, needing to break the suffocating atmosphere in the cab. He keyed the mic. "Breaker 19, this is Polar Bear southbound on the Dalton. I have a medical emergency. Is anyone copying? Over." Static. Not the usual crackle of atmospheric interference, but a heavy, rhythmic pulse of white noise that seemed to sync with the passenger's whispering. 36 Mark slammed the handset against the dashboard. Damn it. Talk to me. Who are you? The truck hit a patch of rough ice, rattling the cabin. The passenger's head did not sway. His body moved with the stiffness of a mannequin bolted to the seat. Mark felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. Not from heat, but from pure adrenaline. He looked at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. The engine temp was normal. He just needed to keep driving. 2 hours to Coldfoot. Just 2 hours. He looked at the passenger again. The man's chest was not moving. He was not breathing. 36.5. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. He made a choice. He was not going to wait for Coldfoot. There was a DOT maintenance station about 20 miles ahead. It was closer. He would dump this problem there. He would get this thing out of his truck. "We restopping," Mark announced, gripping the gear shift. "I'm dropping you at the shed." As soon as the words left his mouth, a loud crack echoed through the cabin. It sounded like a gunshot. Mark jumped, the truck swerving slightly. He looked at the windshield. A fracture had appeared at the bottom corner, right in front of the passenger. But it was not a stress fracture from a stone. It was frost. Thick, opaque ferns of ice were blooming on the inside of the glass, spreading rapidly outward from the passenger's side. 36.2. Mark stomped on the accelerator, desperate to outrun the creeping cold. But for the first time in 10 years, the Kenworth did not respond. The engine note did not rise. The pedal felt dead under his boot. The heavy diesel engine began to sputter. It was a sound Mark had never heard from this truck. A wet, choking cough, as if the fuel lines were clogging with sludge. The tachometer needle fluttered erratically, dropping from 1,500 RPMs to 1,000, then 800. "No, no, no, do not you do this to me," Mark pleaded, slapping the dashboard. "Come on, old girl. Keep pulling." The momentum of the 60-ton load pushed them forward, but the power was dying. The headlights dimmed, turning from a piercing yellow-white to a sickly, flickering orange. The darkness of the tundra pressed in closer, the swirling snow outside seemingly eager to swallow the dying machine. 36.0. The passenger's voice was growing louder, gaining a resonance that should not have been possible for a man who was not inhaling. Mark grabbed the gear shift to downshift, hoping to spike the revs and keep the alternator spinning. The metal stick was agonizingly cold. It burned his palm through his glove. He hissed in pain and yanked his hand back. The leather of the glove was scorched with frost. The truck rolled to a stop. It was not a choice this time. The engine gave one final, violent shudder and died. Silence crashed down on them, heavier than the storm. The only sounds were the howling wind outside buffeting the mirrors and the rhythmic, rasping countdown from the seat beside him. 35.8. Mark grabbed the door handle. He had to get out. He had to check the fuel lines, check the engine, do anything other than sit in this crypt. He pulled the lever. Locked. He shoved his shoulder against the door. It did not budge. It was not just the lock mechanism. The rubber seals around the door frame had frozen solid, fused to the metal in a matter of seconds. Mark pounded on the window. The glass was thick with ice now, the frost patterns curling and twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for him. "Let me out!" Mark screamed, panic finally shattering his composure. He turned to the passenger, anger flaring hot and bright. "What are you doing? Open the door." He reached out to grab the man's shoulder, to shake him, to force a reaction. But before his hand connected, the air around the passenger stopped him. It was a physical barrier of cold, so intense it felt like walking into a solid wall. Mark's fingers went numb instantly, the pain shooting up his forearm. He recoiled, cradling his hand against his chest. The cabin temperature was plummeting. Mark could see his own breath now, billowing in thick white clouds that crystallized in the air. The heater vents, which had been blowing hot air just moments ago, were now silent. The darkness was absolute inside the cab, save for the faint, dying glow of the instrument panel. 35.5. 5. Mark scrambled backward, pressing himself against the driver's door, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the thing in the passenger seat. He huddled in his parka, pulling the hood tight. He was a big man, accustomed to rough fights and harsh conditions, but he felt small now. Trapped. He watched the passenger. The man's position had not changed, but something about him was different. The frost that was coating the windows was also coating him. A thin layer of rime was forming on his bare shoulders, sparkling in the faint light. And his eyes. The cloudiness was shifting. It was swirling, like smoke trapped in glass. Mark realized with a jolt of horror that the truck's thermometer, usually displaying the outside temperature, had switched to the internal sensor. The red digital numbers were counting down, perfectly synchronized with the passenger's whispers. 35. 5 degrees Celsius. It was not the air temperature. The air was already far below freezing. You, recounting body temperature, Mark whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. My body temperature. The passenger's head turned. It was the first voluntary movement he had made since entering the truck. The neck popped and cracked, the sound of frozen cartilage snapping. He looked directly at Mark. The dead eyes seemed to be feeding, drawing something out of the air. 35.3. Mark felt the cold seep through his heavy Arctic gear. It was not a natural cold. It did not start at the extremities. It started in his chest, a deep, hollow ache that spread outward. His heart rate was slowing down. His eyelids felt heavy. He fumbled for the glove box. He needed a weapon. A tire iron, a screwdriver, a flare gun, anything. His fingers were stiff, clumsy clubs. He managed to pop the latch. The glove box spilled its contents onto the floor. Logbooks, spare fuses, a flashlight, and a few crumpled napkins. He grabbed the flashlight, a heavy metal maglite. It was cold enough to burn his skin, but he held on. He clicked the switch. The beam cut through the freezing fog in the cabin, illuminating the passenger in harsh, blue-white detail. The light revealed something Mark had not seen in the dark. The passenger was not just pale. He was translucent. Beneath the rime-covered skin, there were no veins, no muscle tone. Just a gray, swirling emptiness. And stuck to the man's chest, frozen into the ice accumulating on his skin, was a scrap of paper. 35.0. Hypothermia was setting in. Mark knew the stages. Shivering, confusion, lethargy, death. He was already past the shivering. He felt a strange, narcotic calmness washing over him, a desire to just close his eyes and sleep. No, wake up. Mark lunged forward, not to attack, but to see. He shined the light on the scrap of paper frozen to the man's chest. It looked like newsprint. It was old, yellowed, the edges frayed. He leaned in, fighting the wall of cold that tried to push him back. The text was faded, but legible under the stark beam of the flashlight. It was a clipping from the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. There was a photo, a grainy, black and white headshot of a younger man. A man with a thick jaw and bright eyes. A man wearing a suit. It was the passenger. Mark's vision blurred, swimming in and out of focus. He squinted at the caption beneath the photo. The date was October 14th, 1998. Missing, Jonathan Vane, 34. Last seen leaving Deadhorse in a rental sedan. Vehicle found abandoned at mile marker 204. No signs of struggle. Search suspended due to severe weather. Mark stared at the face in the photo, then up at the frozen, animated corpse sitting 2 feet away. It was him, Jonathan Vane. A man who had died on this road 20 years ago. A man who had frozen to death alone in the dark. 34.7. The whisper was louder now, vibrating in Mark's skull. Mark understood with a terrifying clarity. Vane was not just a ghost. He was a heat sink. He was a void that needed to be filled. He was not counting down time. He was counting down Mark. He was absorbing Mark's thermal energy to replace what the ice had stolen from him 2 decades ago. You retaking it? Mark slurred. his tongue feeling thick and heavy in his mouth. "You retaking my heat." The passenger smiled. It was a grotesque expression, the skin around the mouth tearing slightly as the frozen lips curled upward. 34.5. Mark dropped the flashlight, clattered loudly on the floorboards. He tried to move his legs, but they were unresponsive, like heavy logs of wood. The cold had colonized his lower body. He was trapped in his own seat, fused to the upholstery by the sweat that had frozen on his back. A wave of dizziness hit him. The cabin seemed to tilt. He remembered the stories the old-timers told at the truck stops in Prudhoe Bay. Stories about the cold walkers, spirits of drivers and tourists who did not respect the North, who died unprepared. They said if you picked one up, you never made it home. They said they needed a warm soul to trade places with. Mark looked at the dashboard thermometer. 34.5 degrees Celsius. He was dying. He was clinically hypothermic. His brain was shutting down. The panic was fading, replaced by a seductive, warm darkness. It would be so easy to just let go, to stop fighting, to let the numbers reach zero. Think. You have to think. What did he have? The truck was dead. The radio was dead. The doors were sealed. He was locked in a freezer with a vampire made of ice. Marcus' hand, hanging limp over the edge of the seat, brushed against something on the floor. The debris from the glove box. His fingers grazed a small, rectangular object. Plastic. A road flare. Not a flare gun. Just a standard, hand-held emergency flare. A stick of red wax and chemicals. A spark of hope flared in his dimming mind. Fire. Cold hates fire. He tried to close his fingers around the flare. His hand would not obey. The signals from his brain were getting lost in the frozen nerves. He concentrated, putting every ounce of his remaining willpower into his index finger and thumb. Curl. Damn you, curl. His fingers twitched. He dragged the flare closer. He managed to trap it between his wrist and his knee. He leveraged it up, clumsily grasping it with both hands. It felt impossibly heavy. He needed to strip the cap. He needed to strike it. 34.0. The passenger leaned closer. The cold radiating from him was intense enough to burn Marcus' eyes. The ghost was eager now. He could sense the end. Mark raised the flare to his mouth. He bit down on the plastic striker cap. His teeth, chattering violently just minutes ago, were now clenched tight. He tasted blood. His lip had split from the cold. He ripped his head back, tearing the cap off, spat it onto the floor. Now the striker. He held the flare in his left hand, the striker cap in his right. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely align them. 33.8. The ghost reached out. A hand, pale and claw-like, moved toward Marcus' face. Mark could feel the heat being sucked out of his pores, pulling toward that open palm. The ghost was not just waiting anymore. He was harvesting. Get away. Mark gasped. He struck the flare. Nothing. His hands slipped. The friction was not enough. The ghost's fingers brushed Marcus' cheek. The sensation was agonizing, like a branding iron. Mark screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore his throat. 33.5. No! Mark roared. He jammed the flare against the striker and ripped it across with everything he had left. A spasm of desperate strength. Hisses. A blinding red light exploded in the cabin. The flare ignited with the fury of a miniature sun. A jet of red phosphorus flame shot out, roaring in the confined space. Brilliant, scarlet light flooded the cab, banishing the shadows and turning the frost on the windows into blood-colored jewels. The ghost shrieked. It was not a human scream. It was the sound of ice shifting on a frozen lake, a high-pitched, resonant cracking that shattered the windshield. The entity recoiled, throwing its hands up to shield its face. The sudden introduction of 3,000 degrees of burning magnesium was anathema to it. Mark did not hesitate. He did not think about the upholstery, the fuel fumes, or the safety of the truck. He jammed the burning flare directly into the passenger seat, right between the ghost's legs, driving it down into the foam and fabric. "Take it!" Mark yelled, his voice returning as the adrenaline spiked his heart rate. "You want heat? Take it." The seat caught fire instantly. The old synthetic fabric melted and burst into toxic, black smoke. The flames licked up the backrest, engulfing the ghost. But the fire did not burn the entity in the traditional sense. Where the flames touched the pale skin, the skin did not char, it evaporated, turned into steam, hissing and popping. The ghost flailed, its mouth opening in a silent, endless wail. The numbers stopped. The whispering ceased, replaced by the roar of the fire. The heat in the cab rose exponentially. The frost on the windows turned to water and ran down the glass in rivets. The pressure inside the small space skyrocketed as the air expanded. Mark felt his eyebrows singe. The smoke was choking him, thick and acrid. He coughed, hacking up phlegm, but he kept the flare pressed down, holding the trigger of the fire until the plastic handle began to melt in his glove. The ghost was dissolving. The structure of its face collapsed, the eyes melting like wax, the jaw unhinging and falling away into mist. It was losing its anchor in the physical world. Suddenly, the passenger door blew open. The rapid expansion of heated air, combined with the melting of the ice seals, forced the lock mechanism to give way. The door swung wide into the storm. A vortex formed. The blizzard outside sucked the air out of the cab, creating a vacuum that pulled the smoke and the steam and the entity out into the night. Mark saw the last of the gray, swirling shape ripped from the seat and dragged screaming into the whiteout. The fire was spreading now. The dashboard was melting. Mark unbuckled his seatbelt, his fingers raw and blistered but moving. He threw himself across the cab, toward the open passenger door. He tumbled out, hitting the snow-packed road hard. He rolled, putting distance between himself and the rig. He came to a stop in a snowbank, gasping for air. The cold wind hit him, but it did not feel like death anymore. Felt like life. He looked back. The cab of the Kenworth was an inferno. The red glow of the flare had been replaced by the orange and yellow of burning diesel and plastic. The fire raged against the backdrop of the blizzard, a beacon in the void. Mark lay there for what felt like hours, watching his livelihood burn. He waited for the shivering to start. He waited for the pain of the frostbite to set in. He checked his hands. They were black with soot, but fine. A pair of headlights cut through the storm from the south. Then another. A snowplow and a state trooper SUV. Help had come. The troopers found him sitting on the tailgate of the plow, wrapped in 3 blankets, drinking coffee from a thermos. "You lucky to be alive, son?" the trooper said, shaking his head. "Truck fire in this weather? Usually we find popsicles. Paramedics say your core temp is a bit low, but you restable. No frostbite. Es a miracle." Mark nodded slowly. He did not speak. He could not explain that the fire had not warmed him. The fire had just chased the thief away. He watched the burnt-out hulk of his truck being winched onto a flatbed. The passenger seat was gone, incinerated down to the metal frame. Mark took a sip of the coffee. It was boiling hot. He could see the steam rising from the cup. But when the liquid touched his tongue, he did not feel the heat. He did not feel the burn. Felt like tepid water. He lowered the cup. He touched his own face. His skin felt like room-temperature plastic. He pinched his arm. He felt the pressure, but not the sting of the cold wind that was whipping around the plow. He took a deep breath. The air entering his lungs did not bite. It was neutral. He looked at the trooper, who was shivering slightly despite his heavy parka. Mark felt a strange sensation in his chest. Not a heartbeat, but a ticking. A rhythmic, mechanical compulsion. His lips parted. He did not want to speak. He tried to clamp his mouth shut, but the urge was overpowering, like the need to cough. 37.0. Mark whispered. The trooper turned. What was that? Mark stared at the trooper with eyes that felt suddenly clear, sharp, and empty. He looked at the warmth radiating from the man's neck. He felt a hunger he had never known before. 36.9. Mark whispered, his voice sounding like sandpaper on stone. He was not cold anymore. He would never be cold again. But he would never be warm, either, unless he found someone to share the ride.